Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Rate Limited podcast. This is the best podcast in the world, said by ourselves because we benchmarks ourselves. Just kidding. Yeah. This is going to be a really great show and a great episode. We are AI practitioners and we are actually using these models day to day. And what we want to deliver is a lot of value to you. And what I do myself is I do some AI coding. My name is Ray Fernando. I also have Eric, who's the founder of Repo Prompt here, and he actually has an app, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well, as far as like what he does for testing these models. And a lot of us had these like experience and insight. We also have Adam, founder of Gosu Coder, or Gosu Coder as what he goes by online. And he also does extensive testing and benchmarks on these models. So what you're going to expect from the show today is us to kind of go over Sonnet, the best model in the world, and its claims. Some of the benchmarks that we have from using these models in these different platforms, as far as like GPT-5 versus Sonnet, we're going to get also some interesting insights on the technicals of these context windows. Why are some of these types of things shrinking when we're using maybe Codex? And why are they behaving a little bit differently when you use them on these different platforms? So we're going to go into a lot of depth there. Also about like thinking windows. How do these models actually think, and what does that actually mean for you and your output? Does it actually mean better problem solving? Do the problems actually get solved in the way that we think about them? And so this is our show, Rate Limited, and we plan to come on every couple of weeks or so to kind of give you the update. And if you want to stay up to date, without a bunch of fluff, without a bunch of, just be real with us, come hang out with us, because this is going to be a really great time. And let's get right into it, boys.
Great. Thanks, Ray. Yeah, so I think like what's on top of mind this week, we just got, Sonnet 4.5, Anthropic came out and is like, this is the best coding model in the world. And Adam here has actually gone and just put out benchmarks just this morning. I don't know when we're going to air this episode, but like right now, as we're recording, it just came out, and like his claims are that it is the best one, and he's got a lot to go through. So I'd love to hear, Adam, like what is your thinking on like how you ran these tests? Like what is your thinking on what the model's doing really well for you, and these benchmarks, unlike a lot of other ones, the tests are not all online. Adam runs his own private benchmarks, which I think keeps them of higher integrity. It's harder for the labs and the agents to kind of game them. So what's top of mind for you there on this model, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, start off to be really clear, like best is so hard, right? Because there's so many different like factors to actually measure when we're talking about the best model. What I look at, and I felt like this was a good place to start, is if I have a really detailed spec, can the model actually follow that spec to completion? So that's very different from debugging or like looking for, like if you're trying to plan something, it's very different. So a lot of people will be like, oh, Claude 4.5 Sonnet's the best, but it's really like the best at what? Right now, I would say it's topping the charts at, if you have a plan, it can execute that plan really well in the majority of AI coding assistants that are out there. But if you're planning, that may not be the best model. If you're looking at bugs, that may not be the best model. But I would say the gap is pretty low, to be honest. GPT-5 is right up there with it. We've even got some of the Chinese models that are right up there with it. So it's not like a massive difference between Sonnet 4.5 and the others. But yeah, I did just release that today. I should have it on the website here in another day or two. But I don't know, Eric, you also use models, I would say, differently from the way I test them. You do have some agentic capabilities, but most of my coding on a daily basis for the company that I'm actually building is done with things like root code, open code, Codex CLI, things like that. I don't know, maybe what's your take on Sonnet 4.5?
Yeah, so I mean, I spent a lot of time running it yesterday. I was building with it. I'm working on my own benchmark that evaluates some of the kind of file editing and context retention capabilities that I'm looking for in models. And I find it's an interesting model. It's fun because it's quick. It's like conversational. You're able to kind of bounce with it and is able to kind of stay on track and do things well. And it's able to like poke around and invoke bash and do all kinds of nice terminal use tools to kind of pull out information. And I like that I know what it's doing as it's talking to me about it. So, but I do find that there's a point where as you're using it, you get to kind of the limits of its knowledge, and it starts hard coding fixes and doing things that, are not kind of what you want out of a solution. And then you bounce that over to like GPT-5. If you've prompted it right, it's able to kind of spit out like a really exhaustive solution. So like, there is a difference there in how these models behave. And right before the show, I was talking a little bit about this with Ray, and I think, like, as I'm crystallizing my thinking around this, like there are kind of different classes of models and what we call like reasoning models. And the way that I'm thinking about it right now is that you have these light reasoners and these deep reasoners, and they behave in their own quirks. And I think in an agent, it's a little tricky to kind of get the most out of each side because they are very different. Like, a lot of them are, so far, like if you use Gemini, like it will just think and then output and then call tools and whatnot. Whereas like Codex, if you're using that, it will call tools in its chain of thought, and that's like an interesting quirk too. And I've seen failures where Codex will in a tool call output a huge manic panic attack in the call, and actually say like it's having a manic episode in the chain of thought, which is very strange. So that's like, it's very quirky. These models are kind of still in development. But yeah, I'm curious, like what Ray, what do you have to say on all this? Like what are you thinking about?
Yeah, one of my favorite things is like as soon as something comes out, just immediately popping into a live stream and kind of starting to play around. And so I had a couple different perspectives or first looks, and one of them was actually immediately in Cursor, because Cursor offers this, and if you just go to the max the max mode, you theoretically get the full context window. And I gave it a simple problem to solve, and it's like, but it's very platform specific. So I'm using Next.js. I'm using Convex for my database, and I was using Polar for the payment system. So those like are kind of recent in the AI training, and so they're kind of a little bit sometimes out of scope, but sometimes they get picked up in the recent training data. And depending, so that those are it's kind of like, let's just this is a current stack that people are using, and this is the way I use it. I want to see if I can actually add a feature. The bug, I was actually say like, how good is it at problem solving a bug? So whenever I was checking out for payments, it would time out. And it's like, for me, it's like, oh, this is an issue with the connection, and it drops a connection. It doesn't continue it. But just because I know doesn't mean the AI model will know. So I tell it to go fix the bug. And I just copy and pasted the error, because this is probably what most people will probably do, is just copy paste the error they get from Convex in the UI and then say, go fix it. I don't know what's going on. And in Cursor, it was really quick to try to come up with its own solution. And it just said, oh yeah, this is a timeout. Let me add 29 seconds to your your timeout, and it should fix it. It's just like, YOLO, I'm out of here. And then it wrote something that's very convincing to me, saying, the reason why you're having this issue is because of and it tried to re-explain why it got to that solution right away. And I found that it was really interesting, because it's actually different behavior than what happened in Claude Code. Claude Code did solve the problem, but it took a couple tries, and that took like about an hour. But it was the Claude Code inside of the actual the plugin inside of Cursor. And I'm not sure if there was actually just launch day jitters or something like that, but they just took a really long time to go through things. And I had to kind of prompt it saying, can you just go look up on the web, the Polar SDK, and go look up the Convex, documentation to see how these types of things play together. And after kind of pointing into that direction, that's where Claude Code was able to kind of get right to the solution. And so, yeah, those.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I'm building like an agentic system as well, but it's for a different industry. It's for marketers. And one of the bugs that I was working through with Sonnet 4.5, I keep saying 4.5 was that I would say, okay, that is a bad solution. How about trying something else like this thing? So then it would go do another bad solution. I'd be like, that's a worse solution. And it would be like, you're right about that. Let me revert back to the previous solution. And I'm like, no, we just talked about that being a bad solution. So it was like it's ping-ponging back between two bad solutions. And this was in Claude Code. And then I took that same initial prompt, gave it to Codex CLI with GPT-5, Codex Medium, and it did it first try. Like, it had a great you code review it, like everything was spot on where it needed to be. Again, that's very subjective. It's a one-time thing. But I felt like 4.5, and I think I said this on X, if you were to tell me I was using Sonnet 4, I'd probably believe you, just because I can't tell that much of a difference. I don't know if you guys feel the same way on that.
No, so I found personally Sonnet 4 was unusable for me. Like, I couldn't trust it ever. I had some good times in the good times of the early Opus 4 release with Opus 4. I was like, I had some good moments with it. 4.1, there was a lot of it's tough. So if you're not familiar, there's actually this point in time where the devs for Claude Code were slowly over the course of a month like ramping up these like system reminders. And like if you'll notice, like if you're using Claude Code often, it'll be like, oh, I just saw your thing, let me just update the to-do list. And it's because it's constantly getting hammered to update its to-do list, and sometimes it doesn't even do it, and they add more and more because they're like, oh, it's not doing it, let's add more reminders to do it, and it's not working. And so the model is weird. I think they've kind of maybe reworked a little bit on that with the new release and the new model. Maybe it needs less of that. But Sonnet 4 for me, like it would just constantly like it would start doing something, then get sidetracked, then fix this other thing, and then it would make a mess, revert something, break a file.
Oh my
It's
God.
not very usable. So 4 or 5 is a little bit more reliable, but and it's more succinct and will stop a little bit sooner instead of just continuing and continuing. So I do appreciate that about it. I've noticed it already.
You should try it in Zed, just out of curiosity, see if you
Yeah.
get the same result. So like my spec's very particular about what it should do.
Mhm.
Man, in Zed it over engineers the crap out of it. And it's like, okay, we're
Yeah.
gonna generate this document. Now we're gonna generate a full testing plan. Now we're gonna generate code to actually execute that test. I'm like, that was nowhere in any of my spec. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
we need one more document to actually do this. And I'm like, oh my God.
Whoa.
Like so then I actually brought this up in my video. I don't negate points for over engineering when really I think I need to.
Yeah.
So I think there's like some measurement there that's got to go on. Anyway, I think you were about to say something, Ray.
No, I agree with that because there's some people in my Discord already this week because the Claude team already started enforcing limits and they're already hitting limits and they're not even like, I was like, they're just regular users. They just prompt the model and just use agentic coding every day. And they're on the $200 max plan. I'm like, what?
So I have some hypotheses on this actually. I think it's a couple things. So one of them is the parallel tool calling. So that's new in Claude Code, and the model likes to do it also kind of aggressively. It's like, let me read like 20 lines of code 5 times for some reason instead of just reading like more code. I don't know, because I think it knows like if I hit a limit, then there's too many tokens. It's going to block that tool call, but not this one. So it does like it splits it up, which in itself like uses a lot more tools, a lot of more context by doing that. And then sometimes that fails too. Like if it's trying to do like 8 edits at once, it'll sometimes fail. And then it retries the 8 again, and that's like way more usage, and that's no good. But then the other thing is that they've announced like this like rollout of their context engineering and like pulling things out of the memory, and that breaks cache. Like if you're pulling stuff out, then all those tokens are gone, so you have to rebuild the cache. And in some cases it's fine because like, you know, maybe you do it for like some window later in the chat and you keep a lot of it, but like a lot of it does get expired. And I think if you're breaking the cache more often, you're hitting limits faster. And if you're on an API key, you're going to feel that for sure, I'm sure. So that's an interesting thing. So I am not like 100% on all of this, like what they're doing, but they've kind of announced that, and I have some suspicions it's partly related to these limits.
Yeah, I have noticed, to your point about parallel tool calls, it definitely does that a lot. I wish I had more visibility into what it's trying to do, because to your point, if it's calling like, if something that could be done in one tool call, if it's doing it across 5, like that's just using our limits up for the sake of using it up.
Absolutely.
We just don't have visibility into, or I haven't figured out a way to get visibility into that. I was using Crush, and Crush, surprisingly, with Sonnet 4.5, also, it was trying to do a lot more like tool call. It's just a very interesting model overall, because when you look at the outputs of when I do my evals, it's using about 10 to 20% less tokens on the output. It's not significantly faster though. Like it's maybe like 10% faster than Sonnet 4, but it's not cheaper. So
Yeah.
it's like, to your point, like maybe there is something there on the caching that I hadn't even thought about there. That's happening.
The caching and also it's reading more information. I think like it's trying to get more to the bottom of what you're doing to get a better understanding, which I can see is a big difference from Sonnet 4, which was very surface level and just jumping to conclusions with very little information. And if you're using Codex, it's like the complete opposite, where it wants as much information as you can give it before it even tries to think of a solution. It will read for like an hour if you let it. Like if you try, if it's supported, like if the window isn't hit, like it's like, oh, there's more to read, let's do it.
There's jokes where like, Codex spent, or CLI, GPT-5's Codex spent an hour to change one line of code. Literally, there's times like where I feel like that. It takes forever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We mentioned Codex a little bit more. I wanted to kind of get a little bit of what I've been observing, and I've noticed some folks kind of noticed that. So I'm not sure how much time you guys spent working with Codex, but
A
like I
lot.
used it a fair bit. Yeah. So one thing I've noticed a lot, and it's like as you're using it deep into the chat, it starts to forget about tools it's been using, and it
Mhm.
also starts to try and do everything with Python. Like it starts to get into this mode where it's like, oh, let me edit that file with Python. Like it doesn't trust its own editing tools. It doesn't trust like certain things. So it tries to like create tools to kind of solve problems. And I'm finding that like as you get deeper, like there's something happening to the context window in that model that is really changing how it behaves. That's very different from other models. And so one of my hypotheses on that actually is that so Codex is the only tool, like the only model where it calls tools in its reasoning trace, and we were mentioning that earlier, and the thing is that reasoning trace has its own context window that's like separate from the like main, but it's like kind of mixed together, but like it's not as big as the full advertised limit. And as you're calling through tools and you're going deep into the context window of a chat, it starts to kind of get cut off, and you'll notice sometimes that the number on the context goes back up. And what I'm suspecting is that they truncate parts of the reasoning, or they'll even remove it, and then you kind of go on. And when that's gone, then everything you've done so far with the model is kind of lost to history, and you're getting to a point where all of a sudden it's no longer able to reason really about what your problem is in the same way, and that's when you get an off the rails like bad output, and it's just really unfortunate. So I'm curious if it's something you guys have observed, and if that's how you're feeling about the model.
So I want to touch a little bit on the Codex tooling itself, because you mentioned like kind of like the way it's doing tool callings and stuff. It is the first. So I actually thought it was buggy when I first used it, because it was trying. Because I do a lot of my coding on Windows and Linux. Those are my two. But on Windows, it kept doing PowerShell commands, and I'm like, man, why is it trying to do all these like PowerShell? So I actually went into the code base and I was looking. Most of its tooling is done through whatever shell you actually have active. So PowerShell, if you see PowerShell, that's actually by design. Some of the Python stuff is actually by design, and it kind of like twisted my head around, because the agentic systems I've built in the past don't behave like that. Like I have a write tool, I have a create tool, I have an edit tool, and they have a shell tool, and then that shell tool, they just make it do whatever it wants to do. So I just pulled this up over here to the side. They have a shell tool. They have the unified execution. They have an exec command. They have a update plan and apply patch. They have a web search, view image, and then they have like special tools for like local shell. And they have the MCP stuff. They have a very basic like tool set there. So to your point, like I never know if like the way it's trying to do Python is right, because everything's kind of done through shell, and it's like, oh, I'm going to write Python and just run it in your shell. And it's like, is that by design? Maybe, I don't know. So that throws me off too. But I will tell you, my first like week with it, I'm like, man, this thing just is broken. Like it never uses its tool call. It's always using PowerShell. Like what the heck's going on? I don't know if that kind of resonates with what you're seeing, but the code base just is odd to me. Not bad. It's just different from what I'm used to seeing.
So it's funny, like so I have my own set of tools with repo prompt. I have like you said, like the edit tools to read files or some navigation. And early on in the chat, if I'm connected with it, it will always use my tools every single time. Like it's like it honestly doesn't trust its own tools at all. It's like using my tools, and it's like, oh, these are great. But then deep in the context window, it like forgets they exist and just switches to Python. And
That's
then it's
interesting.
Yeah.
So basically, like in your case, your system prompt is kind of geared up the tools and stuff for your system, and then what you're seeing is like it just kind of starts to ignore that and do whatever it's been trained on, which is probably this shell thing that I'm talking about in its current.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
So that's like deep in the window, like when it's like completely overwhelmed with what's happening, and I think it lost track of like its reasoning trace. That's when it starts to kind of fall back to basic training, and it's interesting to see.
It is.
Yeah.
What do you think, Ray? Like, have you had a chance to play around with either Codex CLI or Codex extension, or even GPT-5 Codex in other tools?
Yeah, I've mostly used the Codex as an extension inside of Cursor. And a lot of the times I'm just using it to fix bugs and just kind of be my main driver and so forth. And the way I actually kind of, for planning, I actually use GPT-5 High to just have it search through my code base for the various plans and have it kind of generate a basic spec. But I've made a really basic documentation structure, and it's kind of something I learned from Eric, was that like whenever you have file paths, that actually tells the language model the context of what you want to be done. So I use that technique that I think I learned from you, Eric, I think last year or something like that. And I made a documentation folder, and it's a basic Kanban flow, but it's basically, you know, whatever's active is one folder, whatever's completed is one folder, and then whatever's planned is one folder. So my specs, I have a little agents MD file and a specs file, and that's kind of what I like start out with a conversation with. And it has a little folder tree and stuff that's inside, and it defines the specs whenever an agent's doing some work. And so whenever I have the spec already kind of lined out and already active, I just hand it over to Codex, and I just kind of let it do its thing. And a lot of times it's just using the, you know, the current the plugin that's currently running, and that runs fantastic. And also running in the cloud is just even more fantastic, because it runs, it updates its documentation afterwards, and then I get a sense of what's going on. And a lot of at first I would just run them locally because I just wanted to actually read the output in the code. And a lot of times I found two different things. One is Codex is really great at debugging issues and finding them, and then like actually trying to fix them in the right way with the right patterns using my code base. And it does follow rules extremely well. And so I'll talk about a technique a little bit after the kind of this explanation of what I do. The other thing is that Claude Sonnet, like you say, or Opus would like to just try to get to a solution and kind of exit really quickly. But I noticed when it came around to design related tasks and UI UX kind of vagueness, GPT-5 in general didn't really understand my intent. It wanted extremely explicit instructions for how I wanted a pattern. So a lot of times, you know, when you're returning data from like an AI model, you'll have like a lot of text. And from a UX pattern perspective, you don't want to just show all that to the user. You want some clever ways to kind of only reveal things as they're needed. And so a lot of times I can just tell Sonnet this really vague thing. It's like, I'm doing this request and here's a bunch of stuff that comes down. Here's an example. And then Sonnet already knows like, okay, I should be calling this Shadcn component because this accordion's going to hide it in this way. And we should use tabs over here. So I don't have to even tell it that. And it does it without prompting in essence. And
I think that's part of his training. But yeah, it definitely, you definitely do feel it. And I wanted to mention as well, like I had the mispleasure of having GPT-5 Pro design a dashboard once. Oh man, it like I don't know who this dashboard was for, but like it was just like a waterfall of information that like one page. It was like, oh, it's all there. It's all in your viewport, all of it, all at once. That was like, never again letting that model design anything.
Yeah, it's so what I like to do. I don't know if this is the right way to think about it, but I think about it like Claude Sonnet 4.5 reads between the lines really good. So to your point, Ray, it picks up intent, but the negative of that is it'll do things. So like I've seen it go and like I've seen people do demos with it, and then you'll see them flash the code by, and I'm like, oh, it totally just faked whole parts of that. Like that's not actually a real implementation, but the demo looks good. Like that's cool. GPT-5 on the other hand, it does less reading between the lines. So my prompts will behave very differently in my system that we're building for my day job. Like behave very differently with GPT-5 because it follows directions more explicitly than with Sonnet 4.5. So when 5 first came out, I actually was not the biggest fan of it because of that, but I've actually come to really appreciate it because I kind of like the ability to be able to control it a bit more. So it's interesting you bring that up too, that you had that same thing, Ray.
Yeah, I'm curious for you guys. I approach this, you know, the longer you spend time in engineering, I think all of us have 10 plus years in the industry. You know, like anything, you always want to automate the boring stuff and also automate repetitive tasks. So you start to think from an architecture perspective. And a lot of the times I feel like GPT-5 is like the perfect way to like say, okay, I have this task, you know, go do it in this specific architecture. And you know, it's going to follow that pattern more often than not. Right. And the way I think about it when I've been like, because I'm still learning like web development, you know, learning quote unquote, because it's relatively new in my perspective of languages. And so one of my favorite things are like these, you know, Tailwind, V4, you know, tokenizations and like, you know, the Shadcn design system. And so a lot of times like you see Sonnet just generating new like just completely, like you say, just for the demo, but it doesn't actually follow the convention, of actually like the why this design system was made, or, Tailwind v4, and kind of referencing just that, the CSS that's there for the global file. And it's like GPT-5 more often than not understands that that system is there, and it knows that it should, in its thinking traces, you could even see it's like, oh yeah, I need to go back and make sure I reference this file and kind of keep pulling that in. And so I was just trying to thinking, have you guys had similar results outside of like web development? I'm just curious to see.
So
Yeah.
I think what that comes down to a lot of the time is that like GPT-5, as I was mentioning, is like a lot more hungry for context, and it will try and learn as much as it can about your task before it goes to implementing it. Whereas Sonnet is like, okay, I get what you want, let's do it. I've done this before, let's solve it. And it'll get there, and it didn't really consider everything because it didn't read everything. It doesn't know everything that you wanted it to know. And so like a lot of what that's all about, in my opinion, is just like how much information are you giving the model initially? Like, are you just kind of prompting it vaguely and just like letting it kind of run off? And I think that's where you start to get some differences in like the environment that you're running these models in, and like what tools you're giving it to work with, and like how much time you're spending on that initial prompt. Like to your point, Adam, you're spending a lot of time on the spec and making that really good, and taking all the ambiguity out. And I think for a model like GPT-5, that's like the perfect way to go. For Sonnet, like 4 or 5, like I'll have to test it more on how well it does. It seems like it's doing really well with a good spec. The older ones were less good with it. But like they'll do parts of it and not the full thing. The thing I really appreciate with GPT-5, and especially if you're trying to build a spec like this, or you're trying to really reason about architecture, is that you can kind of have it really think through like all of this information deeply. And I think so when you're working with an agent, there's a term that comes up a lot. It's called like a hot context window, where like it's just like the right mix of it's done enough research, it's not too far, it hasn't used up too much of the available context window, the problem is clear, and it's able to really just, okay, let me reason about this. And if you have no initial information and you're just having the model reason from the start, it doesn't have much to go by. It doesn't know what to do, so it needs to gather that information. But when it has the information, it's able to kind of solve things much more deeply. And that's where you really see a model like GPT-5 shine, where it's able to really reason for a while, like minutes at a time, come up with its own spec for what it's about to do, and then kind of solve it. Whereas if you're using Sonnet, like it'll reason a couple seconds here and there, bounce between things, and you can, that concept of a hot context window still matters, but it's not to the same point where it's like doing that internal monologue of finding a spec. And like a lot of what I've been doing over the last like year with building my app is spending a lot of time on these prompts and giving them to models to kind of think through. And the first model that was really exceptional at this was O1 Pro, where it could think for like 5 to 10 minutes and just really reason and not call any tools, and just here's the input, think about the solution, and then write me what you think at the end. And I think GPT-5 still does really well in that environment, where if you give it a sufficiently detailed prompt, it's able to really output really interesting output. And that's part of just having a long reasoning time. And so that's just like the gap there. And by contrast, like Sonnet doesn't do so well on that. If you give it too much initial context, it wants to read its own context. It's just so tuned on this agentic loop of gathering information, trying to poke holes in it and figuring out a solution and doing it. Like it just wants to get to an outcome with the tools it has, rather than just thinking through like in solitude. It's an interesting difference there.
Man, I love thinking about the way you are, because a lot of it goes to like how you actually work too. So I'm Ray, you mentioned this too, like doing remote jobs. Like so I have tools set up where people on my team, non-technical people, can go and put tasks in, and we can have a PR generated by them that we can go review. There, we want a lot of context building. We want it to go through and figure it out. When I'm coding like locally, I like to conversate with the model. I like actually getting ideas before it actually even starts writing code, and then I'm the one doing kind of like the building of what needs to happen. And then one of the reasons I've always liked Sonnet 4, because you mentioned you didn't like it, Eric. I liked it because I guess I never really let it just go do its own thing. It was just hey, I want you to go make this thing, add an API that does this with this particular thing in there. And it did really good at that versus, trying to solve a problem. And what I've shifted a little bit lately with GPT-5, because it's doing a lot more reasoning, where I can be a little bit more vague, or I can have it like going, and I've been more impressed with that. So I feel my own personal workflow is changing, but traditionally it's very much been like that pair programmer or me guiding it flow.
Yeah. No, I fully love that part of Sonnet where you're just kind of bouncing with it and like it's interactive because it's so
Yep.
quick versus like a reasoner where like GPT-5, you write a prompt, you have to get up and go do something else because you're not going to, you're just going to waste your time waiting for it to do anything. Like, when it first came out too, it was so slow. The
So
Codex
bad.
model, like it was like 10 plus minutes for anything to come out. And when Codex first launched, they would show you all the reasoning the model would do in the chat. You can still get there with a hotkey, but like you're just looking at the terminal and you're just seeing nothing like for so long. And I find that the UX of that it leaves a lot to be desired. Yeah, I think models need to be a little bit more interactive so you feel like they're doing something valuable for you, and that's part of I think the preference for Sonnet.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I actually use multiple AI coding things at the same time is because of exactly what you said. Have GPT-5 going and doing whatever, and over on the right side, I'm like researching or thinking about the next thing I need to do, and because like literally, I would pull my hair out. Like it'd be insane if I was just stuck with that one
Yeah,
interface with GPT-5.
yeah. So I'm curious, Ray, have you done like a lot of parallel coding, or are you kind of more like one single shot? Like, what are you thinking on that?
It's funny because like it's not been asynchronous. It's been very serial. It's just like next to next to next, and um, I guess I do more waterfall methods. So like, and that's just kind of what I've been used to in my quality of like for the last decade plus. Because a lot of times when the changes land, I just like to play with them right away. I want to steer the model in a better direction. And then it kind of goes with my experience too. It's like, should I be spending more time on this, or do I have enough of this to kind of move on to the next thing? And part of it is also trying to learn about the models. So I just know that if I introduce too much messiness, it becomes harder to find when like a regression happened. And so I like
For
to
sure.
check things in along the way, and I can kind of pull back. And it's like, okay, this is when something got introduced. That was that conversation over there,
Hmm.
and I can kind of like snap back to that and just kind of throw everything else out, right? Or take something that I've learned and kind of snap back. So I think it's just right now because I'm still in this like early phase. Literally, we've only thrown the first pitch of this entire baseball game of AI.
Hmm.
So I'm spending a lot more time probably reading through, investigating the models. I think if I was probably a teenager, like I would probably just YOLO and have like 50 different terminal windows open and be like, yo, look at like these 50 apps I just shipped at the same time, and they're writing code to write code for each other, and each one has a persona. Like, I mean, part of me wants to YOLO like that, but I don't have like the money to like just burn away.
Okay.
Uh, it's like, unless somebody wants to drop a massive sponsorship, like, I'm down to do whatever.
Yeah.
So
No, go ahead, Adam. Yeah.
yeah. Did you guys read that blog post that Cognition put out about Sonnet 4.5? Did you
Oh,
guys
I
read
was
that?
looking
I
through
didn't
parts
get.
of it. I didn't do the
Yeah.
whole thing though.
So
Yeah.
I'm probably going to do a bad job summarizing it, but basically they built a new version of Devon because Sonnet 4.5 was so different. They claim they have a set of evals, like a junior level eval. So when they say that, I assume that means like what I'd say is like riddles and like one file changes, function changes, so small simple stuff. I could be wrong. I'm totally reading into that, but they claim it's like 12% better and 2 times faster. And to me, it was like I honestly have gotten to the point. If you go back a year, I didn't know this, but I think that you can almost do that with any model
Hmm.
because what you learn, Gemini 2.5 Pro is the greatest one for me. Like taking the same prompt in Sonnet 4 and Gemini 2.5 Pro, very different results, very different behavior. But if you really tune a system prompt to a particular model, I do believe you can get those kind of gains that like Devon's claiming. Whether they're testing it like fully right, but that's what they have to test it with. 2x
Hmm.
seems a little much to me, but I do like the idea of like really fine tuning these harnesses around a particular model. Have you guys thought about that some, or
Oh,
like what do
for
you think
sure.
of that? Yeah,
Well, I think so. It's interesting to see the changes that you can make to a system prompt because I think Claude Code in particular for 4.5 they've reduced a lot of what they include in the Claude Code
they
prompt.
did.
Though the Claude AI one is a different story, and that one just keeps getting bigger. But yeah, I really do think like to a lot of the credit of if you're talking to AMP, they've been shooting this horn for a while, like saying like yeah, you got to really tune your harness for the prompt for the model. But I think it comes down to like the tool set. It comes down to like what is the lab training the model like pushing it towards. Like if you're emulating the Claude Code experience as much as possible in a terminal with a certain set of tools, you're going to get better results because the model calls tools in that way. Like I noticed, like I can add a search tool and I'm seeing 4.5 in it. 4.0 didn't do this, but it'll add like some grep commands that aren't in the tool description because it's like that's how I call the tool. It just does that like from memory. So like the more you can tune to the baseline of where the model is trained, the kind of better you're going to get to that. But I think you're still kind of hitting a ceiling of like this is what the model's ceiling is, which is the harness it's been trained to operate in. And so there's a limited number of amount of gains you can get from kind of over tuning beyond that. I think it's comes down to efficiency. Like if you're prioritizing, to your point on Zed, like spending a lot of time on spec versus just kind of jumping to action and getting quick results. Like it sounds like Cognition is prioritizing speed and output versus depth. So if you're kind of tuning your harness in that direction, you're going to get good results. But it really depends on what your goal is. Like, is your goal to get a junior assistant, or is it to get like an expert level pair programmer? Is it to get like an expert debugger or code reviewer? These are all like very different systems.
I like that.
Yeah. I do think in my personal use, like what I'm seeing a lot is that like this method of like prompting a model one shot, like doing things well, like it works super well with like deep reasoners like GPT-5, Grok, or Gemini. Not so much with the tool oriented Claudes, but I do find Claude, if you're able to get it to invoke, this kind of elder of a deep reasoner, you're able to kind of get really good results because for one, like as to your point, like GPT-5 is harder to prompt, is harder to talk to because it takes everything so literally. But Claude kind of gets what you're saying. But if you're having Claude prompt GPT-5 for you, giving it enough context and having it think about your problem, that's where you're able to kind of get the best of both because you're getting a better tuned prompt for the model on GPT side. You're getting the wisdom of a smarter model that's able to think deeper on certain problems with the curated context window. And then you're able to kind of get like this kind of deep planning with rapid execution with like good double checking on results and iteration. And yeah, I really do think going forward, we're going to need more and more of pairs of models and pairs of context windows to kind of get the most out of all of these, because unless you want to really be that second pair, like if you're the second context window, you're a brain and you're constantly monitoring everything that's going and happening, and you're able to think through these problems deeply, it's totally valid too. But if you want automation and just kind of want shit set and forget, like there's no kind of a way around that, I think.
Yeah, I think the second context window actually resonates a lot because that's really the way I've worked typically. So like, this is terrible analysis, but yeah, I'm like the reasoner model, and I'm having it go and do the grunt work for me. Like that's the way I've worked traditionally. But one of the things that I say, Eric, about like what you're building, what I appreciate about repo prompt, and I know I've picked on you a little bit about this. Like, man, I would use it if it was on Windows, right? But yeah, it's like there's very few AI coding tools that are doing something significantly different. A lot of them really are a clone of something else over and over again. So just calling that out, like that's why one of the reasons why I like your perspective on this, because you really are coming at it from like a whole different harness approach. Like even that pair model approach that you're talking about, I think is a really cool thing.
No, thanks. Yeah, cheers. Yeah, I know, and focusing on Mac, like it's always the Achilles heel for me. But the thing is, like at the end of the day,
though, you're one person.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to do everything, and building cross-platform apps in general is so challenging, and that's why like you have two things that exist right now in this space. It's either you have an Electron product that's like just a fork of VS Code. Zed is its own thing, which is I admire their craziness. And then there's everyone else building a terminal app, and then even a terminal app has different set of tools. Like you're mentioning PowerShell is a very different tool, so you have to tune your model differently. And all the labs are kind of using Unix-based systems, so like you're not getting the experience that they are when they're using these tools. So like that's the challenge there, and just making it all work well seamlessly. Like if you want to have something that just works for people, you gotta spend time trying it and using it. So
totally, yeah.
So I'm curious, you guys, what do you think? I know we had this little bit of a discussion earlier, but like the Chinese models and like all the stuff that's kind of coming in from there. I know you're doing a lot of testing there, Adam, on these models, and kind of want to get your perspective because I haven't been able to spend a lot of time personally, and I think you probably save a lot of listeners time too, figuring out like, are some of these worth the hype? Are they as good as they say? Kind of what's the story around kind of what's been happening there?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is a lot of people keep going back to like, man, I got to find the best model. And I think Eric hit the nail on the head there, because I don't think there is a single best model for like everything. So what I've been thinking about the Chinese models, for example, GLM 4.6 just came out. Prior, GLM 4.5 was like my designer model. It's the model that I love to use when I'm doing like front end work. I feel like it has like a great design taste. QWEN 3 Coder to me is like a Sonnet 4 comparison, to where I could sit and like tell it what to do. I could be the reasoner, and it can go do the code for me and be really cheap and fast, depending on the provider I've got. So I like to think about them in that way, but I wouldn't use QWEN 3 Coder to like build a plan or a spec for me. That's just not what it's good at. So whenever you're using these models, like try to think about them like teammates on your coding team. Like, hey, this is my architect. This thing is good at design. I like the way you put it, where you've got like pairs of models putting together. You know, and maybe it goes beyond. Maybe it's pair, maybe it's 3, maybe it's 4. I don't know where it goes like long term, but I do think models are good at certain things. So that's where benchmark is so freaking hard, because I'm only measuring one thing. But I'll tell you right now, like I prefer GLM 4.5 for front end stuff, but it's hard to show that on a benchmark.
Interesting. I may have to make one. Yeah, I think it'd be kind of cool to work with you guys, because to figure out how we kind of put together a benchmark, because like, you know, I don't know, I feel like I want the benchmark to almost reflect kind of what I do day to day, which is, you know, I prompt the model, you know, I work on front end, I work on the back end, I work on something that's kind of newish, that's not really in the training set, right? You know, a lot of these. And then I also make my own rules files too. So that kind of has some influence on it.
Oh, for sure.
You know, so like as far as how steerable it is, and the reason why I make the rules is because I want the model to be steered in a certain way, to know that there's, you know, these little almost like signposts about like, okay, you should turn left here.
I've actually thought about like that. Like there should be benchmarks on. Do you guys ever feel like that sometimes the models just ignore the model, or the harness ignores the rules you put in place?
For sure.
It's like,
Yeah.
It'd be really cool to measure, like, all right, if I told you to do this, I told you to authenticate my API this way. Like, why every, like, 80% of the time do you forget to do that? Like, it literally is the rule there. So,
I mean, just
adherence is so important.
Yeah. Thinking about this from a couple, like, just putting my QA hat on, is like, okay, the first test I would do, it's like, okay, fresh prompts, does it adhere to the rules? 25% context window fill, does it still adhere? 50%, 75%. And I'm thinking about that Chroma paper, that from ChromaDB, right? Where they talk about that context rot. So it's like, is there a certain point where maybe the rules can kind of introduce context rot too? I don't know.
You know, though, I haven't seen the exact prompt there, but I've seen reports that Claude in its kind of reminders will tell the model, hey, you don't have to listen to this. So I think that's part of it. Whereas Codex is a lot quicker to like glob onto it, because it takes things more literally. Claude, it's a lot more like, well, you know, you're there to help the assistant, but you're not like, you know, you're there to also be safe and respect the Anthropic's values. And I don't know if you've noticed it, but like actually every time it reads a file, there's a little warning that comes that says, hey, if this looks malicious, like don't help the user. Like don't do every single time you read a file. So it's just constantly flooded with reminders like this.
I see that. Wow.
Yeah, it's these system reminders with Claude Code are very aggressive, and I think it plays a big part into how it like adheres to these rules. And so I'm curious as well to see like that rule adherence, how it would compare in Claude Code versus in like Cursor or something else, how they're like putting the rules together. Like, you know, because I know in some tools they will like append it to the system prompt, and other tools that like reads it and it's like kind of user data. So like the way that you kind of introduce that is super important too.
Yeah, there's somebody on my team in our prompts that we have in our system. He had something in there like, this is very important. I will lose my job if you mess this up. Like, you know, like, I don't know if that's gonna work or not. That's Jay. So like, I see why, like, because to your point, like there are things that could be overriding its listening abilities, right? So he's trying to like influence it to say like something bad will happen if you don't do this particular thing. I don't know how well that stuff works, but he's
not anymore. I don't think. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. Yeah,
I have no data on it. I just thought it was funny.
Yeah. I mean, it's all vibes at the end of the day, right?
Well, I think that's kind of why we started this show for those folks who are just kind of tuning in. It's like, we wanted a way that kind of filter through the noise. There's just too much crap out there. And sometimes it's just hard to understand what is hype, what's not. But a lot of times as we come together as engineers, our perspectives and what we're doing in our day-to-day lives kind of add up to the bigger perspective of these things. So if you're seeing this podcast, or you're listening to this right now, drop a comment right now on the video. Let us know what you're working with, what your experience is, because it actually has to be kind of done from a community perspective.
Mhm.
100%.
And the way that they do their benchmarks is so narrowly focused on one specific thing. And I think they realize that there's no way they can get millions of people to test this thing. And that's where our voice kind of comes in. And we're doing this to kind of reach out to you. So if you're kind of experiencing that, definitely drop the comments below. Like, what are you testing with? What experiences are you seeing? Are you using front end? Like, what IDE are you guys using? What is your preferred type of thing? Have you seen better results with a specific model? Like, Adam was saying with GLM5, as a designer. I mean, that's cool. I want to go try it now as a designer. That's pretty awesome, to do that type of thing. So yeah, definitely appreciate everyone's, perspectives and stuff.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up for today then.
Agreed.
Yeah, like we'll have to see what the community thinks, what they come up with in terms of things that matter to them. I want to hear from everyone who's listening to this. Like, what matters to you in an AI model? Like, what matters to you in an agent? Like, how are you using models? Are you still like using ChatGPT? Are you full in on on these agents? Are you using Cursor? Are you using Zed? Like, what tools are important to you, and like what brought you to that tool as well, and what's keeping you there? So I'm curious to hear what everyone thinks.
Yep, that'd be awesome, man. Guys, it's been fun hanging out. So
Absolutely.
until next time.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe a last type of thing. Like, what is your current tool that you're using right now, or sets of tools? Like, what's your kind of setup?
Oh, good call.
That you guys are working with, maybe to kind of like encourage people to also reply.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I'm currently right here on the screen. I have root code on the left side, and I have Codex CLI in my terminal. So, although I am committing to actually spend time with Warp this month, because Warp, I really do want to like give that a go.
That's cool.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So for me, I've got the Ghosty terminal that I'm using, and today what I'm rocking is Sonnet 4.5 that is prompting repo prompt via the MCP to talk to GPT-5 for planning, and that's kind of how I've been going about it. I find like I like Codex, but it's just the way that you prompt it. Like I'm getting better results this way, and I'm finding it a lot more pleasant to work with than just waiting 10 minutes for a response. Yeah.
And if you guys haven't seen the video that Eric did on that, it is super cool to actually see how he's doing the control with MCPs and stuff on that. At some point, we might have to do a little demo on here just to showcase that, because I still...
Yeah. It's crazy. It's like, it makes sense, because you can take advantage of all the models, even open source stuff too, which is crazy, right? Like I think that's kind of like to have a tool to be able to kind of say, okay, this is my intention, and then kind of spawn that out to these different applications and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so right now my current setup is just I have Cursor, and then I have Claude Code installed. I have the Codex CLI, all these plugins that are installed. And initially I was just daily driving with GPT-5 High. It usually actually just inside of Cursor without the Codex plugin. And then I would generate a lot of plans either in Claude Code Opus and then spit them out into Codex or GPT-5. Just normal. I would actually use GPT-5 Low a lot of the times, actually, because the specs were just really good and it adhered to them pretty well. I also like to generate a lot of my agent rules files. So I sometimes start out with Cursor's rules in the /generate, and that's kind of what puts it all over my repo. And then I'd have Claude Code or the actual GPT-5 read through that, and then try to like make its own agents. And then I explicitly tell it to put rules files in specific component folders.
Oh, that's cool.
And then look at the patterns. So what's nice about GPT-5 High is because it spends so much extra time thinking, it gets really nice, like succinct agents MD files into these different directories and tries to actually really understand the pattern of my coding. Because I want Codex to just, once it gets into a directory, it should already know what to do. And then I'm using this other technique in the main rules file that kind of does like this kind of like indexing /library. So that kind of knows at a high level every time it loads up, it's aware of these other directory structures where other rules files are. So when it does in its thinking window, hopefully it kind of understands what that is. So that's kind of been my super solid thing. And yeah, so GPT-5 is mostly my main.
I don't know how you don't have more gray hair using GPT-5 High as your main one. That would drive me nuts.
I got the beach.
I just want to make one note, Ray, on that workflow, just because like, yeah, you're like, yeah, GPT-5 is like super succinct. So I've noticed, just like as a note here, like that it doesn't, it's prompts and it's like information. It doesn't work for every model. Like it's good for if your GPT-5 is reading those files, that's perfect. But if you have Claude reading those files, sometimes it's like too succinct for it. And so you have to just like watch out, like who's the intended audience of this rule file. And that's something to keep in mind. Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah.
I was going to say there was another thing that I wanted to share. I don't know. Maybe we'll kind of touch apart because I thought there was something else that was kind of fun for us to share. Maybe I don't remember what it was, but like, or I know we were talking about keyboards earlier or something like that. But maybe we'll save that for the later.
Yeah, this has been fun, guys. I appreciate it, and I feel like we've got a lot to learn from each other. So I'm excited about this. And then we are trying to do this every other week. Let us know how that cadence works for anybody that's watching this, enjoying this. Appreciate all you guys.
Cheers.
Yeah. So for folks who are tuning in, this is basically the name of this podcast is called Rate Limited. Every other week, we're going to be coming at you with whatever's been happening in the past couple of weeks. A lot of things change in AI, and sometimes it's really hard to keep up with all the stuff that's going on. So the three of us as engineers have a decade plus experience in our various industries, and we approach this from a very practical standpoint. Using the models, testing them like Adam is doing with his benchmarks, repo prompt, with Eric and his app, and like actually digging into the models and getting into these very technical specific things. And myself, Ray Fernando, who does like AI code, live stream coding live as soon as these models come out, testing the biggest claim that we have, is this the best coding model in the world today? And you get to come here without any fluff. Right now, there's no one sponsoring the show. And we're trying to keep it as clean as possible because we want our perspectives to be, as practical as possible. And this is not a one-way street. Using these models requires, all these different perspectives. And so we encourage you to just drop any comments and leave them below. What's your experience using these models? What do you want us to take a look at next? What are we not looking at that would be interesting for us to take a look at as well? Share this with a friend. If you find someone else who's kind of nerding out on this stuff and is like really kind of getting into this is the perfect time to just kind of slide in the DMs and let them know about like, yo, you got to check out Rate Limited. These guys are really cracked, and we are the best podcast in the world. So
number one AI coding podcast in the world.
Right up.
That's awesome. Cool.
All right. Well, gentlemen, until next time.
Until next time.
See you guys.
Thanks, guys. We'll see ya.